Hi, so welcome. I'm going to talk a little bit about judgment, one of the beliefs that I have, and I'd say it's probably the most important belief, really. And I suppose in a nutshell, it really is that we're all going to be judged fairly, and that's it. I could just sum it up, leave it at that, really. But actually, I want to rely on some notes that I made about this a while back, and then just give a little talk about it. And the reason I say it's the most important thing is because it's all to do with our destiny, what happens to us, ultimately, and the consequences of how we live our life. That is all the different choices that we decide to make in our lives, how we treat each other, not just for a few hours, weeks, months, but for the entirety of our life. The totality of all of your decisions made throughout the whole course of your life. That is what makes you as a person. If you think about what your identity is as a person, your identity is your actions, the different things that you actually do in life, the things you say and do as well. We tend to identify with a profession. I was a home carer, a factory farm worker. I was customer service assistant. I identify with lots of different roles that I've done over many years. I was homeless at one point. I was a mentally ill patient at one point. I was an unemployed person. I can identify with all the different things I've done. They're the different aspects that make up the character of who I am, I suppose. A man is many things, and all the different many relationships that we have in life. What we've done, how we've interacted with others, they are all the multitude of different components that make up the totality of who we are in life. We don't always know who each other are. We often only know how someone's presented to us. We may walk into someone's life on chapter 37 or something. We may know the last few pages or chapters of their lives, but we may not know the entirety of it. We may just know an edited version, what they want us to know. We may not show other people all our worst faults, or all the times that we've suffered. We may not know ourselves, the true worth and value of who we've been over such a long period of time. It's my belief that who we are is all of the different decisions that we've made throughout the course of our entire life. We can't just separate and say, I'm just the last few months, or I'm just the last few years even. No. Everything you've done in your life contributes towards who and what you are. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't mean that we can change, and that we've done things that were wrong in the past, that we can't also be forgiven for that. I'm going to come on to discuss that in a moment. Because God is merciful and gives people that chance to change, to transform their lives, to repent. But it is conditional. And we should also want to give people that opportunity, and ourselves too, that chance to change as well. But again, that equally is that is conditional too. That means that if we recognise something is wrong, if I say it's wrong if I take my anger and frustrations out on people and verbally assault them, as I've done sometimes in the past, I recognise that's wrong and I'm sorry about that and I want to be forgiven for that. That means a commitment to not doing that, to restraining my temper and having more self-restraint and control in that. And whatever the sin is, whatever the thing that's wrong, that harms others, it means for all of us recognising where we have wronged in order to ask for that forgiveness. But that then, as a condition, means that we are making a commitment to attempt to change, to strive to be better, right? So, mercy is there, and is a wonderful thing. And, there's no greater feeling than to be forgiven for something awful. It really is like a weight being lifted off of us. A wonderful thing God's judgment, in some ways, I look at it as having a left and right side to it. And the right side is firm in righteous judgment and condemning our wrong actions, quite righteously, in saying where we have harmed others deliberately and unnecessarily. And if you think about a good parent that didn't tell their child and discipline them when they misbehaved and were wrong, you wouldn't think they were any kind of parent at all, would you really? If you just allowed them to get away with anything and for there not to be a consequence. But at the same time, I look at that as almost the fatherly, the right hand kind of figure. But at the same time, there's a forgiving, merciful, almost the feminine side of God, I might say. The left side that wants to be nurturing, that wants to be compassionate and give people the chance, give us all the chance to change. Now, these are the notes that I made about the judgment of mankind. Only God can ultimately and will judge all of us and know the totality of our soul, and hence decide the fortune of us. Every moment, every hour, day, week, month, year, decade, every life that we have lived, God will know all. Knows all our good points and bad points. Knows the good and the bad that the world has done to us, and the good and bad that we have done to the world as well. But we know not when the hour will come, when we will pass on. We know not when that will be, but we do know at some point it will. Only God alone is right to judge us in terms of where our soul will go, what the fate or destiny of our soul will be. No man, therefore, can save or condemn us in that sense. And why is only God right to judge us in that sense? Because we do judge each other, and we need to judge each other sometimes. We're all called at certain times to make judgment calls and to discern a situation. I might think that somebody's behaving recklessly and endangering other people's lives and themselves, and I might feel the need to warn them, or indeed others might feel the need to warn me too. We might feel called to step in a situation. For example, we might witness someone being assaulted and feel the need to help and assist the victim during their assault. We might feel the need to restrain the person who's carrying out that assault. And failure to make a judgment call in a certain situation may be a neglect of our duty, of our responsibility. There are certain times and situations where we are called to make a moral judgment about a person, about ourselves, about a situation in general. But that doesn't mean that we're making a judgment about their soul and where it will go in the next life as a consequence of this one. So why is God alone able to make that judgment? I'm not saying small, specific judgments, passing sentence, you know, as we all will feel called to do, and that's a difficult thing for all of us, but knowing when to and when not to, of course, you know, is a difficult issue we've all got to strive to do. But that's a different thing from making a judgment on the whole of someone's life, on the whole worth of their soul. And why can only God do that? Well, God knows all our sufferings. And God's been there through the whole journey, knows when the world has wronged us, knows me as a victim, even when I can't talk about my own victimhood, and many of us can't perhaps. If I don't know about it, or I find it too difficult to talk about, yet still God is aware of both abuses done to me and the consequences of these. And it's reassuring to know when the world has denied you a victimhood and compensation even, and your need for support and understanding through that. That like a loving parent to a child, God will acknowledge all such sufferings that you've been through and knows and understands the support you need. And I find that is a reassuring thing. And for anyone that's gone through something and not been given that true support or recognition of what they've been through, you know, there probably is no greater reassurance than that. Yet God's knowledge of us is a double-edged sword and works both ways. Because God knows also when I have wronged others, when we all have wronged others. You never find someone in life who's just a victim only in a pantomime. But in the reality, in the real world, in the complex world, people are complex. People tend to do much good and much bad, to a varying extent. I'm not saying it's the same amounts. And God knows when I have wronged others, when I have behaved abusive or neglectful to others. God knows all my villainy, my selfishness, my meanness, my cowardness, my stubbornness, my greed. Indeed, God knows every wrong that I have ever done, even the smallest deeds and the multitude of them, and the largest ones too. And that's quite frightening to think, actually. You know, imagine when you were a young child and your dad finds out about all the things you're getting up to when he was away on holiday. You didn't know he had a camera watching you from his remote location. And you wish you hadn't done quite so many things. You wish you'd known back then, perhaps. But quite frightening in a sense, you know, when you are a young child who doesn't have any power over God and any ability to manipulate or to control or to hide away any of the deeds, and knowing, if one does, that God has that power and authority and final call and judgment over what will happen to us. Well, it would be much more frightening if we didn't know that God was compassionate and forgiving if we ask for it too, though. God knows my virtues and knows when I have strived, as well as my villainy as well. My fellow man may not know these things about me, and I may not know them about them. We don't know everything about each other always. You can know some of the people some of the time. You can't know all the people all the time. But God knows both my villainy and my virtues. Knows where and when I have strived to assist my fellow man. Knows my patience and humility and kindness and bravery and generosity, even if the world does not know these things, my virtues or my villainies, but yet still God does know. And that's reassuring if you've worked hard in something and made every effort, but it's not always recognised. That in itself is another great and reassuring thing. Even if I try and deceive the world, I may try and hide my flaws away or exaggerate my virtues, perhaps, as indeed we're all tempted to do sometimes. But even so, God cannot be fooled, and God knows. God knows when the world has treated me well as well. When the world has provided for me and nurtured me, loved me and supported me. And God knows all these things. Even if I am not always grateful, perhaps, for such things, and don't acknowledge them, such blessings, but yet still God does know. In short, God knows the good I have done for others, and the good others have done for me. God knows the bad things that I've done to others, but also the bad things done to me. Our knowledge of each other is so limited, more than we would think sometimes. We often assume we know people more than we do, in fact. We even assume that we know ourselves better than we do, really. How often do we really fully stop to actually take a full account of ourselves? Are we really able to look honestly at the worst parts of ourselves? It's a hard thing to do, actually. It's harder than you first think. Acknowledging and admitting those things is just the first step, of course. Being able to talk to others and amend our behaviour and improve it, that's much harder. But it begins with honesty, at least. You know, that's just the first step. But that's hard enough itself, isn't it? You know. But our knowledge about other people, as well as ourselves, can be very limited. You know, if we imagine how hard it is to be honest to ourselves sometimes, you know, how much harder is it for other people to be honest to us about the worst things they've done? If we struggled to be honest to others, we may be ashamed or embarrassed or fearful of their judgment too, as indeed many of us would be. So there's many reasons why we won't know so much about so many. But of course not. It's obvious when you think about it, really. Our knowledge of each other, therefore, is so limited. We may not know someone that was a victim or an offender. They may be too ashamed, even, of their victimhood that they went through. It may be too hard, emotionally traumatic for them to speak about it, depending on where they are with it. They may want to hide it for whatever reason, for fear of other people's reactions. We may not know if someone has exaggerated their victimhood, perhaps, to gain sympathy, or if they've made it up entirely, or if they attempt to minimise the harm that they have caused others to avoid the judgment of their fellow man, something we could all be tempted to do. I might say, oh, but I wasn't verbally abusive when I was drunk, you know, I wasn't mean and insightful without good reason, you know, it didn't really matter that much. You know, I might try to sort of minimise the things I've done. We may not know the good a man does. He may not want praise or flattery. He may not want to boast of such things that he's done. You know, many people do things, but they don't advertise it necessarily. Things not just from the recent past, but from many years earlier in their life, you know. Do we really know how honest anyone is? They may have good motives for not going out to tell other people the things they have or haven't done. We may not know a man's blessings. He may well be ungrateful and take things for granted. We all can sometimes. And not give thanks to the many that have helped and supported him. He may want to portray himself as a self-made success, or more of a victim to gain sympathy. Yet it could be that a man does not tell us such things that he lacked, that he does not want to dwell on his neglect, perhaps. To judge and know the true worth of a man, one must totally be aware of his circumstances, that is, the good and the bad that the world has dealt him, in order to know the context for what his actions were, that is, the good and the bad that he's done and given out to the world. So in terms of knowledge, it's quite obvious when you stop to think about it. But actually there's a whole kind of fascinating subject within that. How well can we know ourselves and even the people we're closely acquainted with, never mind passing or casual acquaintances, or people that we are estranged from, or that we may know only brief passing accounts from. You know, how well can we know anyone? Well, I would say that we can know some people sometimes, actually. But then again, sometimes we can all be wrong as well. But just as we're all limited in our knowledges of each other, we're limited in our power that we can have over each other as well. In the amount of power that we have within our lives. Certainly some people have much more power. Some people have more status, or more money, or more physical ability, or more mental ability, or IQ. You know, some people have more resources, or more contacts, or more networks, or more ability in science or arts, or whatever other field, more technological prowess. We all have different kinds of abilities in different fields, to a varying extent, yes. And yet all of us have some degree of limitations. We may be successful in some things, and yet struggle and be failures in other things perhaps in our lives. No one is successful in all things all of the time. And of course, we're all limited in terms of our time. We're all mortal. Anyone can get ill, diseased, and who amongst us isn't going to pass on at some point? However strong or wise we might think we are, or knowledgeable, or physically or mentally strong, but still, one day, we must pass on too. And our time here is limited. Can we choose what will happen to us in the next life? Can we bring our soul back into this body or that, or choose to go to this place or that for however long? Or is that out of our hands? Certainly we have some powers, be they psychological, emotional, social, financial or physical, and we should be cautious how we use such things, whether to help or harm others, knowing that whether others know or do not, yet still God will always know. God has powers beyond the understanding of people. We cannot explain how the universe itself was created. Well, now many people have theories about how, or even why. There are many people today that believe in the Big Bang Theory, you know, that created the universe. What created the Big Bang, or what created the thing that created the thing that created the thing that created the Big Bang, and so on. I can only think from that there is an eternal realm, that there cannot have been a starting point. And what created the starting point otherwise? There are things beyond our knowledge we cannot know. How such things are possible. How a soul itself is possible, and what it is in its essence. How it's created or recreated. So God has these powers beyond the knowledge of humans, beyond the limits of science even. Science has taught us many great and wonderful things, to be sure, yet even with such technological advances, can science prevent your death or mine? Can it save your soul? Can it recreate the universe or bring back extinct species long gone? I do not know how God can create a world, nor the many wonders within it, nor our soul, nor to bring a soul back, but to do many other countless wonders. How God creates the sun, the moon, the stars, orbiting the earth as they do, I cannot explain. All the wondrous planets, the animals, the minerals that were formed, yet there they are. I cannot explain how reincarnation is possible, yet it is. But because I do not understand how something operates, that doesn't mean it doesn't. Neither do I understand how computers work, or even how the human body does, or how cities are constructed even. And yet they are. Something doesn't depend on our understanding of it for it to be. Of course, that's logical. We as humans do have some limited powers over each other, yes, just as we have also limited knowledge about one another. I cannot send someone to a different place and time, to a different body. I cannot do that, and nor can anyone do that to me. Whatever powers we have over each other are limited to this life. The reason that it is good that God has this complete knowledge and power over us, and that we don't over each other as humans, that our knowledge and power is limited, is that only God, in fact, is omnibenevolent and always loving, and wants the best for all of us. Well, of course, we don't always. None of us do. even the people you get along well with and seem very nice and hard-working, and people that devote their lifetimes and careers striving to help people, giving their energy, their time, even they have their faults and make mistakes and even do wrong things on purpose sometimes, through frustration or anger. We all as humans will sometimes have prejudice over each other too. We have our biases sometimes. We treat each other wrong sometimes because of something that we do, because of our circumstances sometimes. If we've been through a hard time, we may be resentful to the world. We may be angry at it because of abuses that we've suffered. Or it may be just that we've made bad choices. And through frustration or anger or envy or greed, through any number of reasons, sometimes we can treat each other badly. Not to say there's not great love and compassion and bravery and decency and all sorts of great values that there are. But of course, no one is loving and caring and good all the time. No man is all good. No one's driven purely by love all the time and compassionate. And so if we did have such power to have judgment over each other, you know, imagine what results there could be from that. Look at what harm we already do sometimes to each other in life. You know, when we're in the midst of an argument and we hate someone in that moment and we don't properly restrain that anger and we throw out some horrible insult at someone, we harm them to get back at them or something, you know, and we all do that from time to time, you know, not always to the same extent, but sometimes we all can be driven by, you know, such anger or other malicious vices, you know. We can be driven by bad choices sometimes. And just imagine if we had unlimited power to hurt each other, how awful that could be, you know. But it would be nice to think, you know, if we had more power over each other, that we could use it to sort of to help and to love each other more. But because we are corrupted as people, we're capable of doing good and bad, you know, we use that power to do a huge amount of good and bad to each other. You know, we could be tremendously destructive. We already are with our limited power. So probably it's good that it is limited in that sense. Certainly we should strive to use our powers, whatever they be, to assist our fellow man, knowing that it will be in our favour to do so when our judgment day surely comes. We should strive to seek out honest information, to try to learn the truths about one another. We must try to be more loving and compassionate where we can to our fellow man, yet must remember also when both we and our fellow man will also be limited to a varying extent in our knowledge, in our power, but also in our compassion for one another. But God has sufficient for all, has knowledge of all and power over all, because God has compassion for all.